You take a drag. Within a few minutes, a molecule called THC travels from your lungs into your bloodstream and makes its way to your brain. Once it gets there, a quiet chemical reaction begins, altering ancient pathways and creating the state we call the high. But what if the biggest changes happening inside your head aren't the ones you feel in the moment? What if the real story isn't just about the temporary buzz, but a more lasting shift in your brain's wiring? Let's go inside the brain to see not only the immediate effects that create the high, but also the subtle, long-term impact on the very circuits of your mind. The immediate high, a chemical impersonator. When you use cannabis, you're delivering its main psychoactive ingredient, THC, to your brain. THC is a master of disguise. Your brain has its own system for managing things like mood, memory, and appetite, called the endocannabinoid system. Think of it as a series of locks and keys, keeping everything running smoothly. THC is like a key that can pick those locks, specifically a receptor known as CB1. But it's not a perfect fit. Unlike your brain's own keys, which pop in and out in milliseconds to send precise signals, THC lingers. And these CB1 receptors are packed in areas controlling pleasure, memory, thinking, and coordination. One of the first things that happens is a disruption of your brain's normal communication. THC finds neurons designed to slow things down, known as GABAergic neurons. You can think of them as the brain's traffic cops. By binding to them, THC tells those cops to take a break. With the cops on break, another chemical, dopamine, gets a little bump in the brain's reward circuits. This is a key part of the high. This dopamine release in an area called the nucleus accumbens creates feelings of euphoria and relaxation. It's the same pathway that lights up when you eat a great meal or accomplish something you're proud of. Like many drugs of abuse, THC stimulates this reward pathway. But this chemical process has immediate side effects. While you're feeling good, other parts of your brain are affected. The same process impacts glutamate, a key player in memory and learning. This is why you might suddenly forget what you were talking about mid-story. Your brain is having a harder time turning short-term experiences into long-term memories. This disruption isn't just about feeling good or a little forgetful. It can fundamentally warp your perception. Ever feel like time slows down and minutes feel like hours? Scientists believe that's THC at work in parts of your brain that manage your internal clock, like the cerebral cortex and basal ganglia. It can distort your perception of time. Colors might seem brighter and sounds more intense. This is because THC alters sensory processing in your visual and auditory cortices. For most, it's not a hallucination. It's an intensification of your senses. However, at very high doses, that line can blur, and some people may experience true hallucinations. This altered state isn't always pleasant. For some, it can trigger anxiety and paranoia. This is a tale of two brain regions. While THC can be calming in some areas, it can overstimulate the amygdala, your brain's fear center. When the amygdala gets more cannabinoid signals than it's used to, it can set off a fear response. You might feel irrationally suspicious or on edge. This depends on the THC dose, your genetics, and even your mood going in. These immediate effects are temporary. Once THC is metabolized, your brain begins to return to its baseline. But the reset isn't always instant. For some, subtle cognitive effects can linger for 24 hours or more. But what happens when this process is repeated over and over again? What happens after the smoke clears for good?
Your brain is constantly changing, a process called neuroplasticity. It rewires itself based on your experiences. When you repeatedly introduce a chemical like THC, you're not just creating a temporary feeling, you're giving your brain a new blueprint to work from. This leads to the controversial idea of amotivational syndrome, the notion that long-term cannabis use makes people apathetic and less driven. The science here is complex and still debated, but some studies have found an association. Brain imaging has shown that as a person's cannabis use increases, their brain's reward center may show less activation when anticipating a reward, like money. Some research suggests that the brain's own dopamine system can become blunted in some long-term heavy users. the brain may start to down-regulate its own reward system because it has learned to expect an external boost. This might help explain the apathy that some chronic users report. The conversation around structural changes is also complicated. Some studies have found associations between chronic, heavy use and physical changes in the brain, such as reduced volume in regions involved in decision-making. Other research points to changes in the hippocampus, the memory center. However, the scientific literature is mixed, with some studies finding no significant structural effects, and the role of other factors like alcohol use is still being untangled. Some of these changes might be reversible with abstinence, but research is ongoing to understand how much and how quickly the brain can recover.
This brings us to the most critical part of the story, the developing brain. An adolescent's brain isn't just a smaller adult brain, it's a construction site that isn't finished until a person reaches their mid-20s.
You can watch a full video on cannabis and teenage brain here.
During the teenage years, the brain goes through a vital pruning process, getting rid of weaker connections to strengthen important ones. It's like a sculptor chipping away at marble to reveal the final statue. Scientists are concerned that cannabis use during this period could interfere with this delicate process. For instance, some neuroimaging studies have found that cannabis use in teens is associated with changes in the thickness of the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for planning, impulse control, and decision-making. In some cases, the more cannabis used, the more significant the change. This physical difference has been linked to increased impulsivity. Furthermore, animal studies have shown that THC exposure during adolescence can affect the dendritic arbors, the branching antenna that neurons use to talk to each other, causing them to shrink. Think of it like a computer processor suddenly having fewer connections. It might be harder for the brain to learn and adapt. The consequences could be long-lasting. Individuals who start using cannabis heavily as teens are at a higher risk for issues with verbal learning, memory, and attention. Some studies have suggested a potential drop in IQ for those who start young, but this is a topic of intense debate, with other research questioning whether social and family factors are the real cause. Finally, heavy use in adolescence is strongly correlated with an increased risk for serious mental health conditions, like psychosis, especially in people who may already have a genetic vulnerability. It's important to remember this is a correlation, not a direct causation, but the link is strong enough to be a serious concern for scientists. The story of cannabis in the brain has two sides. In the moment, it's a fleeting chemical event. A molecule mimics our natural systems to create a temporary change in perception, a brief sense of pleasure, and a blip in memory. For most adults who use it occasionally, the brain returns to its baseline. But with chronic use, especially in a young brain that's still under construction, the story can change. It could lead to a blunted reward system, a potential loss of motivation, and measurable associations with changes to the brain's physical structure. The high is temporary, but the chase can leave a lasting mark. Understanding what happens inside your brain isn't about judgment, it's about knowledge. It's recognizing that our choices have biological consequences. Armed with that knowledge, we can all make more informed decisions about our minds and our health.
Care to know whether your brain actually heals after long-term cannabis use? Watch next video above.
If you found this look inside the brain insightful, subscribe for more on the science of how we work. And let us know in the comments what you'd like us to explore next.